Hi, everyone. If you're reading, watching, or listening to this introduction, it means you're probably a student in one of my classes. And you know what that means? You are one lucky duck. Why? Because I'm your teacher, Dr. Spencer Todd BENNINGTON the Fourth. Okay, it's not really the fourth. And please, just call me Dr. B. You're lucky because I care a great deal about my students and I love learning. So I think that means my classes are typically thorough, exciting, and hopefully rewarding. If they're also fun sometimes, that's great. I'm stoked about that. I want you to have fun learning. But I also want you to challenge yourself, to take your time to do something difficult or uncomfortable to afford yourself the possibility to grow. No matter what class you take with me, I'll endeavor to teach you a thing or two about literacy and rhetoric, about how reading rhetorical situations affects communication and design, about how issues of rhetorical power, position, privilege reflect larger systems of inequity, about research and how it can be used to solve problems, and about the many revision processes involved in transforming textual genres into multiple media for different audiences. In short, I'm going to try to teach you how to write good. No, I don't mean write well. I want your communication to be effective and persuasive and all that jazz, sure. But I want you to learn how to think ethically about everything you design, from research papers to the grant proposals to prototypes. It all has material effects on real people. You can help or harm to small degree or large with everything you say and do. So I'm going to try to teach you to write good. I started off writing pretty badly. Why? Maybe it had something to do with the fact that I hated reading as a kid. I would listen, sort of, to my mom read to me, but I don't remember reading a book by myself until I was forced to for school in maybe 6th grade. I remember thinking, okay, this is tolerable. I think I read The Wizard of Earthsea or A Wrinkle in Time or something like that. Nevertheless, late one night when I couldn't sleep, I found myself inspired by the character Sean, his newfound love of Shakespearean sonnets on an episode of Boy Meets World. I found a spiral-bound dime store notebook and wrote my first crappy, sappy, awful poem about how nature is all connected and kumbaya barf. So I was a bad writer, but I had a lot to say. I filled up 3 or 4 notebooks like that, with crappy poems and illustrations, drafts of my first pieces of short fiction, reflective writing, thinly veiled at times as creative nonfiction. Angsty journal stuff, I guess. This was the same time in my life when I first fell in love with Olympic Taekwondo and full contact sparring. Turns out I had a lot of emotions as a 14-year-old. If writing was my way of learning about my mind and creatively expressing my thoughts, Taekwondo became my way of learning about my body and creatively expressing my spirit. Martial arts also taught me the value of discipline and training the weakest parts of yourself. So, I tried to make myself read more, if nothing else because I didn't want to appear to be stupid around my more well-read friends. At some point between Catcher in the Rye and my collection of Chuck Palahniuk novels, I fancied myself a scholar of literature. I'm from Danville, Virginia, and in my day, the Goodwill there had a massive book collection with a shelf just for literary fiction and the classics. So I read a lot of old dead white dudes back then because that's what my teachers and the living white dudes on the internet told me I was supposed to read. Go figure. I'm not saying there's nothing to learn from the Hemingways and Steinbecks and Vonnegut's of the world. There definitely is. But I became bored without realizing it, exploring the same narratives, the same heroes' journeys and tragic ends over and over and over. I even recycled a lot of these old stories trapped in my head into my first novel, a project I submitted as my undergraduate senior thesis at Averett University in 2012. The project, Wrestling with God, was part theological treatise. I went to Catholic school, public high school, and then a Baptist college. Part breakup therapy and part mimicry of all the writing styles I'd learned to revere. In terms of personal literacies, this capstone project reflected my dialogue with the religious dogma I'd been surrounded by my whole life. It also reflected everything I learned at Averett and in my previous schooling about what constitutes classic literature, high art, and refined culture, and of course, good writing. It also reflected the kinds of personal identity crises, disillusionment, and career angst I was undergoing at the time. In terms of research, this novel facilitated my very first national conference presentation. 21-year-old me traveled to Tampa, Florida to speak to a packed room of college students and professors at the Southern Regional Honors Conference about my novel project. I chose to present my research about how to write an effective sex scene. My presentation was called How to Reach a Literary Climax. I still think it's one of the funniest things I've ever done. But both my personal literacies and my research skills were cultivated in entirely new ways when I became a graduate student at Radford University. Suddenly I was reading native authors and authors who were non-native speakers and literary theory, whatever that is, and I was being challenged daily. Radford was a huge learning experience for me, but it was also a fantastic professional opportunity. It's where I learned to be a teacher. First as a teaching assistant, managing my mentor's classes, then designing my own sections as a teaching fellow and adjunct professor. It was there in 2013 that I first taught a composition class utilizing primarily spoken word poetry and hip-hop as text for students to analyze, cite, and respond to. This was when one of my students taught me about hashtag Black Lives Matter. It was in these classes that we mourned the loss of Trayvon Martin, where we first heard the news from Ferguson. It became painfully obvious that we lived in anything but a quote-unquote post-racial society and that increased anti-racist work needed to be done in the classroom. One big thing I learned during this time was that it's a tough world for English majors. So 2 years after earning an advanced degree, after teaching college classes and working extremely hard at multiple other jobs only to still need government assistance, I was admitted into the University of South Florida's doctoral program for rhetoric and composition. The essay I submitted as my writing sample is called Getting Rhetorically Jiggy with It, What Conscious Rap Can Teach Us About First-Year Composition or something like that. It's now published in the Florida English Journal. At the time, I had no real clue what rhetoric even was. Now I have a PhD in it. Life's funny that way. The first couple of years were more than rough. Previously, I had been allowed to write creatively in my undergraduate and graduate thesis projects, provided that I also write a scholarly analytical component. Admittedly, my master's thesis at Radford was pretty well researched, but nothing like the expectations of a PhD program. The whole point of earning the doctorate is to prove that you understand research methodology well enough to design, implement, and write about your own studies for the purpose of publishing your findings in academic journals and/or receiving funding. The rigor is intense, so much so that it often breeds abuse and toxic workplace environments for graduate students. After my first USF composition mentor was temporarily removed from the department for sexual misconduct, I began to look toward digital humanities projects and study professional and technical communication more seriously, trying desperately to professionalize and find myself in the best possible position to earn a full-time job after obtaining my third degree. I established my website, rhetoricalroundhouse.com, as a class blog or pseudo-portfolio, began combining my love and lifelong study of martial arts with my dissertation work, found a new mentor, one who would inspire me to step outside my comfort zone and be the scholar I wanted others to have the confidence to be, and ultimately found the courage to write a dissertation about the rhetorical history of Taekwondo. Unfortunately, this mentor would perpetuate the same cycles of violence and inappropriate sexual behavior that my original was accused of, only this time I became the target. Despite hazardous work conditions, to say the least, I finished my PhD by defending my dissertation on June 19, 2020, over Zoom. We had just gone on lockdown in spring of that semester during the COVID-19 outbreak and subsequent pandemic. As I spoke of martial rhetorics and about theories of anti-violence on Juneteenth, 2020, I spoke too of the ever-present racial violence in America. I spoke the names of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, I spoke of how my first real dissertation ideas came after watching Black Klansman, a Spike Lee joint, because he included footage of the Unite the Right Charlottesville massacre. I found myself thinking back often to the courses I taught at Radford. And it wouldn't be until the summer of 2021 that I had the first opportunity to put all of those ideas, old and new, into my first draft of an original course I like to call Rap Rhetorics. Maybe that's the class you're taking with me now. Cool. I hope you dig it. Somewhere in the middle of delivering this first draft of the course, though, I had my most recent experience with gun violence, one that changed the way I understand my teaching, both in terms of rap rhetorics and martial arts in general. Once again, the period after graduation was a rough time, one that I wasn't certain I would recover from. And yet, still I rose, broken bones, butterfly goo and all, from my bitter chaos cocoon, finding myself migrating back toward home, settling once again in the New River Valley, now as an instructor full-time at Virginia Tech. If you're in my English 1106 class, you're probably wondering, what does this long-winded introduction have to do with writing about research? The answer? Everything. Please, trust me, I'm a doctor. Sincerely, though, everything I've just described to you is the result of combinations of primary and secondary research, reflexive iteration, revision, rewriting, revision, and more research. One of the first things I'll show you this semester is an example of an academic publication. It's my first journal article for Rhetoric Review. The reason I'm showing you this isn't because it's such a great article. It is, though. It's awesome. But rather because I want you to understand the layers of research, personal literacy, revision, time, and drafting there are underneath a single research publication. Everything that I've just described to you had to happen to me. I had to study Taekwondo for 18 years and write the well-researched dissertation I did to be able to write the very first crappy draft of the 7,500-word article that you will see. Then it took 3 years of revising and rewriting that, all unpaid labor, I might add, to get it ready, suitable for publication, while I was also actively working multiple jobs and applying for full-time positions. Does this sound familiar? It should. This is the life of an academic and an English major, I suppose. But I tell you this not to be disheartening, but to help you cut yourself some slack. Really. Reading, writing, researching, and revising are all really hard. But with time and effort, you can improve. Just look at me. No one else in my family has a college degree, and I have 3. I have published newspaper stories, academic articles, and novels. I've traveled internationally to speak about my research and won multiple awards in recognition of my scholarship. And baby, I'm just getting started. And truthfully, I still find reading to be a bit of a chore. Like I said, life's funny. So, who am I? I'm Dr. B. I love Taekwondo and hip-hop and teaching, and I desperately want to make a positive change to this world. I'm working on creating my own nonprofit organization, the Rhetorical Roundhouse Network, which I'm sure will be referenced at some point in this class. And beyond that, I love learning, and I'm here to help. I'm here to help you. So as always, I'm just an email away.